Hi. I don't know if you saw my first video that I put out called Sweet Picking Explained. I actually got some really cool feedback from some people and some other guitar friends of mine. And someone had mentioned that maybe I should discuss the modes a little bit. So I thought, what the hell, sound like a good idea. Let's talk about the modes. Now, the G major scale pattern, and actually it could be A, it could be B, it doesn't matter what key it is, but the major scale pattern itself has 7 notes, and we'll just use G as an example, which is a good starting point, and you'll realize later why that really helps out. But the 7 notes, as you see, are G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. Now what happens is, if you start with a different note, that changes the name of the scale, because if you start with a different note, now your half steps and whole steps are going to land in different places. So I don't know how familiar you are or aren't with the scale patterns, but if you start with different patterns, they're going to have a bit of a different sound, even though they're the exact same 7 notes. So what someone did is decided, hey, let's give each one of these 7 notes a name. A lot of times people will say, well, I like the sound of the Phrygian mode. It kind of has a Spanish sound to it. A lot of people like the natural minor, which is the Aeolian mode, which your typical rock and roll scale. But anyways, so what you have here is, if you start off in G, that is the Ionian mode, and that is the major scale pattern. Anytime someone refers to the major scale, that's the one that they're talking about. Now, a scale can be major, or a mode can be major or minor, depending on where the 3rd note in the scale pattern lands. That's what's going to decide whether that pattern is major or minor. But just to move ahead a little bit, so if we start off on A, we have the Dorian mode. If we start off on B, we have the Phrygian mode. If we start off on C, it's the Lydian mode. If we start off on D, it's the Mixolydian mode. And if we start off on E, it's the Aeolian mode, which is also the natural minor. And then we have F sharp, which is the Locrian mode. Okay, so here we have those 7 notes that we were talking about that are in a G major scale, placed throughout the guitar neck. And this is what it would look like if you found all the G's, all the A's, all the B's, and you put them all over the neck. This is exactly what you would have here. Now, there is an F sharp right here, but the first note of the pattern is G. That's the one we're concerned with. F sharp is one of the notes, but G is your starting note. So now, getting them notes that we've placed throughout the neck, obviously you can't play them all at the same time. So what someone did is decide to break them up into 5 different groups. And as you can see, I've circled those groups, and you can see where they overlap one another. Now, if you come over here to this one, this will give you a better idea of how these patterns actually overlap. Looking at patterns 1 and 2, you'll see where one pattern stops, the other pattern starts. So now go to patterns 2 and 3, you see where they overlap. Patterns 3 and 4, same thing, they overlap. And then patterns 4 and 5, you see how they overlap. So here's what we have, pattern number 1. And if you start off with the root note G, this is considered your Ionian mode. If you start off with the 2nd note of the scale, that's where we have the Dorian mode. Now you could just start off with the 2nd note and play it that way, and that would be Dorian. If you start off with the 3rd note, we have Phrygian, then we have Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and then to the F sharp, where this is the Locrian. But then you're kind of running out of room to play. So what you do is, if getting back to the 2nd note of the scale pattern, which is A, you just create a new shape, and there it becomes your Dorian mode. So your A Dorian is essentially the same notes as your G major scale, your Ionian mode. Then you get to pattern number 3, which is your Phrygian mode. If you start off with B, this would be your B. This now makes it Phrygian. However, if you start with that note, they're so close to each other, you have the Lydian mode. Now this is kind of explaining why there are 7 modes but yet only 5 patterns, because it wouldn't really make much sense to create another shape when the notes are that close to each other. So then we go to pattern number 4, which is our Mixolydian mode. Again, we would have D Mixolydian, same notes found in a G major scale. Now we'll go down to pattern number 5, which is our Aeolian mode, or most commonly referred to as the natural minor scale. Again, it's the same notes that are found in the G major scale. Now you might have heard people talk about relative major and relative minor. This is what they're talking about, and this is why I like to show the scales shown in G major. Because if you're playing in G major, you're essentially playing in E minor, which is what we all tend to do as far as playing rock and roll. So you can, by learning these, it's real easy to improvise or work on playing things, trying to put these in your songs, because you're now in a familiar key that we all tend to use. So this would be your Aeolian mode. Now if you start with this note here, the F sharp, that now makes it Locrian. And that same note again is found in our very first pattern, which I didn't have it on there. But if you were to add this note right here, which you can see, it's the octave of this one here. And if you start with that note, that makes it Locrian mode. The Locrian tends to be overlooked a lot because the notes tend to fall in funny places, so that scale pattern is really not used a whole lot. Okay, what I'd like to talk about now is what makes the modes a major or a minor. What makes something major or minor, and even when it comes to building a chord, is the third. Now you might have heard people say a minor third or a major third, and what they're talking about is the third note in the scale pattern, where it lands. For example, here in pattern number 1, the G major, the Ionian mode, the third note happens to be B. 1, 2, 3. Now this is also B. If you go 2 whole steps, it's just for the shape of, for the sense of playing the shape, it's over here rather than doing the stretch. But it's the same note. So if you have 2 whole steps together, that's what makes that scale pattern major. Now if we go to pattern number 2, the A Dorian, the third note in that pattern is 1 whole step and then a half step, making that a minor scale. And that's why sometimes people say a minor third, because the third is not here, it's flat 1 note. It makes it minor. So your Dorian mode is actually a minor scale. We can go down to pattern number 3. We have our Phrygian mode. Notice the third note is a step and a half. It's a minor third. Now if we start with the Lydian mode right here, we have that same distance right here, and that note would be the same note right here. So now if we start here, we're playing a major scale pattern, although it is the Lydian mode. We go down to pattern number 4. We have the Mixolydian. We have the same scenario. So now we have 2 majors again together. Getting down to pattern number 5, the Aeolian mode, E natural minor. Notice the steps there, a whole step and a half step, creating a minor third. So that's why it's a minor scale. Okay, so before we end this lesson, I'd like to just review the very beginning here. The G major scale pattern has 7 notes, and those notes are G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. For each note, the pattern is given a name. G is Ionian, A is Dorian, B is Phrygian, C is Lydian, D is Mixolydian, then E is Aeolian. And we have the F sharp, the oddball guy, the Locrian mode. Okay, so before we end the lesson, I'd like to review the patterns one more time. Pattern number 1, where you can see there's the Ionian mode. Pattern 2, which is the Dorian mode. Pattern 3, which is the Phrygian and the Lydian. Pattern number 4, which is Mixolydian. Pattern number 5, which is Aeolian right here. And then of course we have the Locrian mode if you start with the second note of the Aeolian pattern, which is the F sharp.